I'm Chuck Fienning. I've been a member of this church since 1983.
And I'm Sue Fienning, also a member of this church since 1983. What a coincidence. And we want to tell you first why we joined this church and how we happened to come to this church. We were moved down here with industry in 1983. But before that, we came to look at houses, I think, in the late part of '82.
November.
And I knew Charlie wanted to join the Presbyterian Church. He's always been a Presbyterian. So I looked up in the phone book, and I said, there are 26 Presbyterian churches in this county, and we are going to try them all before we choose one. And we are not going to be in the old church in the old part of town. But the first night we stayed at the
Holiday Inn, now the Oyo Hotel, around the corner on Washington Street.
Go ahead.
That was Saturday night. That day we had selected a home because Sue was 6 months pregnant, and the doctor said, you can go to South Carolina for one weekend to select a house, and then you're not traveling by air anymore. So we stayed over at what was then the Holiday Inn, and it was Sunday morning, and our flight didn't go back to Chicago until that afternoon out of Columbia. So I said, well, honey, why don't we go to church while we're here in town? We can check out one of the Presbyterian churches. So that's when she looked up and could see there were 26 Presbyterian churches at that time in 1982 in the Yellow Pages.
But this one was the closest to the
This was
Holiday Inn.
closest.
So we came down and we went to this church and we walked in the fellowship hall. And who did we meet?
Well,
but
actually, I thought we met that person in the chapel.
Oh, it could have been.
Nobody knew us here. We were just strangers from out of town. I said, we could just walk through this. Looks like they have a Sunday school rooms in here. We can just walk through here and nobody knows who we are. Church doesn't start until at that time 11 o'clock, so this was like 10 o'clock, 10 in the morning. So we walked down the hall to where the preschool is, and we walked back and took a left turn by the office and walked down there and took another past the parlor, and then ended up in the chapel. In the chapel, the Fraser Edmonds men's class was just adjourning, and one of the members of the class in a brown three-piece suit came up and introduced himself, and I took it he was one of the elders of the church. We explained we were just in town for the weekend, house shopping, and we were going to be moving to town in a couple of months. And he said, well, if you're going to worship with us this morning, let me introduce you to someone who can take you up to our sanctuary. Bubba, come over here. And so we were introduced to the mayor of Sumter at the time, Mayor Bubba McElveen. And on the way up the stairs coming into the sanctuary, I said, Bubba, your name is familiar. I believe you might have met my father when he was down here looking at Sumter for an industrial site. And because he mentioned your name, that you had something to do with his decision to pick Sumter. Bubba took us, he said, yes. He said, now I remember. Yes, I remember your daddy. I remember your daddy. And he took us back to the back of the church where the Youngs and the Harvins sit in that area. And he proceeded to introduce us to Dr. and Mrs. Hick Harvin and to Marion and Kenneth Young Sr., some of the more senior people.
And we sat right in front of Thomas and Piercy Parker, and we found out later that Piercy ran the nursery school that we were very much interested in for our 4-year-old son.
So our boys, one was in ninth grade, one seventh, one in preschool. He was 4, and then the baby was coming in a few months. So we were very interested in the preschool. So Piercy talked to us about that, and we understood that if we were members of the church, that we were higher up on the selection list. At that time, they had, I think, a waiting list of people for the church school. Everybody here was so friendly to us that day. It was just really amazing how people came up and introduced themselves, and we knew right away this was a very friendly church.
Well, we left this church, and I said, if that's the church you want, Charlie, that's fine with me, and we never looked at another one.
That's correct. When we moved to Sumter in January, 2 months later, of 1983, we came right to this church.
And the first Sunday, we've always been choir people. Even in high school, we were choir people. So I was going to sit in the choir and sing. You know, we went to choir practice, I think. And Bill Scobie, who was the choir director and the organist, wouldn't let me sing because the sanctuary hadn't been renovated, and the steps going up to the choir loft were so little, and I was so big. He said, you'd get stuck.
I think Bill had called on us at home, hadn't he?
Oh, well, we had 2 ladies come from the church, and Bill came, but 2 ladies came with bread, and I know one of them was Ruby Goodrow, and I don't know.
Goodwin?
Goodwin.
Goodwin.
And I can't remember who the other one was, maybe Mary Lily Gamble, but they brought bread, and I think they did this for either new members or prospective members. But in between the time of the call that we're coming, we'd like to talk to you, and before they arrived at the door, there was a knock at the door, and I said, come on in. Well, it was a group of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I could only get them out just shortly before Ruby got in.
You probably thought they were church people.
I thought it was Ruby and the gang coming.
Different group. When they handed us a Watchtower leaflet, we knew it was the Jehovah's Witnesses, and we weren't interested in speaking with them. So, but I remember that Bill Scobie, the organist choir master, called on us at our home, and when we first moved to town, before we had actually officially joined the church, and invited us to sing in the choir. And I thought that was very nice, that we got an invitation to join the choir. And we joined about the time our son Henry was born in February. He was born February 28th, 1983. We were brand new members, and he was born across the street at Toomey and was baptized right here in this sanctuary. It was a very special time. I might add that the gentleman who met us in the Fraser Edmonds room and introduced us to Bubba McElveen was none other than the pastor, Jefferson K. Aiken, Jr. He was the man in the 3-piece brown suit. I thought that was rather interesting. When we got settled in church, out walked Jeff in his doctoral robe, and the Aikens subsequently became and still are friends of ours.
That reminds me of a story. Libby Aiken was a wedding, what do you call it? Coordinator. And she would do all the weddings that Jeff did. But I was asked to be the wedding coordinator for our assistant minister, George Jacobs. And we had a couple dandy weddings that are rather unforgettable. The first one, George and I got called on the Tuesday night before the wedding on Saturday, and the session had just approved to get this young girl married because she was living with this fellow, and they thought, well, they ought to do it in the sanctity of marriage, so we're going to marry him on Saturday. So I did not meet this girl until the wedding rehearsal on Friday night. And we rehearsed it that her Dad would walk her up the aisle, and we rehearsed it that she would walk up the aisle by herself because she hadn't told her father yet that she was getting married. She didn't know if he'd approve, so she was going to wait to the last minute. We were all set, and then Saturday morning I got a call from George. He said, well, guess she told her father. He drove down from North Carolina, and he kidnapped her. And please go to the front of the church and tell everybody that the wedding is off. That was our first wedding. A wedding soon after that was an older couple, and I was told as a wedding director to beware of the matron of honor. She was scatterbrained, is a nice way to put it. At the wedding rehearsal, she was just fine. I thought, I don't know where they got this from. The wedding was, I think, maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon the next day. Everybody got there in the wedding party at the correct time. 10 minutes before the service, she says, oh my gosh, I forgot my shoes. She had come in red sneakers, and she had a tea-length pink dress on. So I remember I came in the back door, and I came around this aisle here, and I looked at women's shoes. And I leaned over this one woman, and I said, what size shoes do you wear? She said, I wear a 7.5. I said, could we borrow those shoes for a little bit for the matron of honor? Well, sure, she said, you can. And she took them right off her feet. They matched that lady's dress. They were pink with little rosebuds on them. And when she walked out after the wedding was over, she walked out with a plum. You wouldn't have known she had no shoes on.
Speaking of shoes, I have a shoe story. We were in the choir room rehearsing for church when Associate Pastor George Jacobs came in, and he was a little perplexed because that morning he had gotten up at dark 30 and had gone into his closet to get a pair of shoes. And he picked out one brown shoe and one black shoe.
It was a dark closet.
It was a dark closet. So he was concerned that he had on shoes of different color. So he asked the men in the choir,
Who wears a size 11?
Who wears a size 11? And I raised my hand because that's my shoe size. And he said, well, may I borrow your shoes? And I said, sure, George. This was in the summer. And I happened to have on a pair of very nice white loafers for summer wear. Tasseled, white tasseled loafers.
Woven.
Basket weave.
Fancy shoes.
Fancy shoes. So I reached down and I figured I could go up to the pulpit, up to the here in my sock feet, and George could wear my shoes. George took a look at the white shoes. The pastor took a look at the white shoes and said, I think I'll just go with the brown and the black. Oh, my. There are some wonderful stories. We've had such a wonderful experience being part of this church and in various roles that we've had. Teaching, she is a teacher.
Well, I'll tell you, I've been a Bible study teacher for I don't know how many years, and I can remember coming home one day, and I said, oh, Charlie, these women are all getting old. They all had gold shoes on today.
Golden slippers.
But one thing that I really, I really so glad that I did, and I did it through prayer, I did it the right way, is when we started the pandemic in
2020.
Late February, early March of 2020, I thought, you know, what's the problem going to be? How can I help, God? And I thought, you know, people are going to be isolated because there was no vaccine. I know our circle, most of us were over 50, and in that dangerous category. So I thought, I know, I'll call everybody. And I'm not a phone talker, but I called everybody once a week and asked if they had anything that they would like to share with the rest of the circle. Or they had a
circle news.
circle news, or if they had a prayer request. And it took me 3 to 4 mornings a week of just sitting with my notebook and going through everybody. And I got to know people in that circle. And everybody got to know one another. And I think because of that, we're a pretty tight circle. And I remember we lost a circle member that year. And we lost 2 husbands of circle members. So those phone calls weren't always easy ones. But, and we found people that were isolated, but had been isolated before the pandemic for other reasons. It was just such a wonderful overall experience, and I did it until 80% or more of the circle members had been vaccinated. And we started with 46 members that year, and I think we ended the year with 47 members. So, you know, when I think a lot of people just didn't have that connection anymore, and I think we've still got a good connection.
Mm-hmm. This is a mission-oriented church whose stated purpose is to know Christ and to make him known by living faithfully, worshiping joyfully, and serving gladly. That has been our mission statement for some years here. And we are involved in mission fields ranging from Sumter to Latin America and through the PCUSA, widespread foreign involvements. That is the way, that is what we should be. We should come here to learn, come here to worship, and depart to serve. Because that's what God wants us to do, not only as a church, but as individuals. So what we do here prepares us to go out into our community or wherever we go and be apostles for Jesus Christ. And that's not easy, not in these troubled times, not with the polarization that's going on, not with the emphasis on material things, on violence, and all the things that we see going wrong. Jesus said, "Be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world." And because we are getting to know him and making him known, we can live with confidence as individuals and a church family that we are carrying out Christ's mission in this place. My faith has deepened since I've joined First Presbyterian Church. I've been honored to serve as an elder from time to time. Now I find myself in the role of the elder. I was called back to service last year. And it's just such a rewarding experience and such wonderful people that we have in this church. And I might say community leaders. Right at this time, we have our local state senator, Thomas McElveen, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Merle Smith, City Councilman Colin Davis. We have 2 previous mayors, Bubba McElveen and Steve Creech. Members of this church have taken leadership roles in different activities in the community and
Joe
the state league. Joe McElveen, former mayor, after Creech for 20 years. Yeah, thanks, honey. And we, I think, cultivate leaders here.
And that can be the old church in the old part of town where the Spirit is still alive.
I think that was something that Pastor Jim Burton was emphasizing when his time was here, was that centrally located in Sumter, we have mission fields within half a mile of this church. And we are in the heart of Sumter, and we are part of the heart of Sumter, along with other mainline churches like Holy Comforter and First Baptist. So we've been here in this place for nearly 200 years, and I'm very excited personally about the bicentennial celebration that's coming up in 2023. We have a good committee working on that. I think it's going to be quite exciting for our church family.